Hey, I'm Jamey from Stonemaier Games, and today I'm going to talk about my favorite mechanism in the game Undergrove, which I backed on Kickstarter and was really excited to get because I've had the pleasure of working with designer Elizabeth Hargrave on Wingspan. This is from a different publisher, but I was very excited to play it. And I've had two plays. In fact, I played twice yesterday, two different groups, and had actually very different experiences. In one game, we didn't have too much progression on the table. In the other game, we had a ton of progression. And I'll explain what that means in a second. Basically, this is a tableau building game where the tableau you're building is shared by all players using these mushroom tiles. So instead of creating your own little tableau, private tableau of mushroom tiles, you are sharing this tableau with all other players. You are benefiting from things that they're doing. There's a lot of positive player interaction in the game. And there's a little bit of times where you might be taking some carbon from other players that they were hoping to use for their own trees. So yeah, throughout the game, you are placing these tiles on the table, and they're essentially, even though they look like square tiles, they're actually octagons because they have these empty spaces in the middle where you can place sapperlings that can grow into trees if they absorb enough carbon. And this ties to my favorite mechanism in the game, in that not only are these octagons where you can place tokens in between, but when you place a token in between, and on future turns, if you have a token already there, you can place roots. You can extend the roots of your trees into different tiles. So there's these little tokens, they're tiny little tokens, so I'm not going to try to hold it up here, but basically they're these little triangle-shaped tokens that you put right here or right here, pointing at a specific tile. If you don't have roots going into the tile, you can't really interact with that tile. And the roots do two things. And this is really why I really appreciate this mechanism, because it's doing one thing during the game that's very important. And it's also, actually it's doing two things during the game that's very important, and it's doing one thing at the end of the game. The two things the roots do, and I'll just hold up one tile for now. The things the roots do that are important during the game, if I have a root pointing at this tile, one is that it allows me to use this ability. It expands my range of action options, a mechanism that I love in games. So you have a player mat that has some actions on it, and one of those actions says, take an action that your root is pointing at on the tableau, on the table itself. And so by having a root pointing at this tile, I have access to this action. That's one thing during the game. The other thing is that when I need to absorb, or when I want to absorb carbon from this mushroom into one of my surrounding trees, because you could have more than one tree surrounding this tile, if I can only do that if I have a root pointing at it. So through the roots, I'm absorbing the carbon into my tree, placing the token on my tree, and potentially growing it onto my sapperling, and potentially growing it into a full tree. So two really important interactions during the game. In addition to having like not one time, but actions that you can take on the tiles, there are also some ongoing actions. Those are the ones that we actually didn't see at all in my first game, but we saw them in the second game, and it was really neat to see this type of action where it's an ongoing benefit. You don't need to activate it, you just have it all the time. Again, that feeling of having a tableau, an engine building tableau, but you're sharing it with all players, or at least the other players who are pointing their roots at this tile. At the end of the game, if you have a root pointing at this tile and you have carbon on your sapperling or tree, or if you have a tree there, you get to score the points at the bottom of the tile. I've said that very quickly. There are some nuances to that, but in general, that's the idea. Have a root, have a carbon to pair with that root, and you get to score the points on that tile. So three really important things for having these roots. It's why the root mechanism in the game is my favorite mechanism of Undergrove. Two other quick mentions here. One thing that I really appreciate about the game is that for these actions, the cost is shown on the left. So you have to flip over a little token, which is a neat mechanism in itself. And you're also placing carbon from your player mat onto the mushroom itself. That's how the carbon enters this general tableau. And then on this one, you have to pay a token. And you might look at this and think, okay, this is just cheaper. Because this is cheaper, this is a better tile. Sometimes that might be true. But in this case, because the cost is 2 carbon, you're putting 2 carbon into the ecosystem that you might need to absorb later. So I really found that I appreciated this the more I got into these two games, that having higher costs actually isn't a bad thing for carbon specifically, because you're putting more carbon in the system. You need the carbon to move the game forward and to move towards being able to score more of these tiles. So I really appreciate that. Also, nice positive player interaction. This one is a tile that says you gain all these things, all other players gain 1 nitrogen. And one last thing, the game was completely eco-friendly in the way it was packed. I don't think there was any plastic in the game at all. I have the kind of the standard Kickstarter version. Everything is cardboard and wood. There are tucked boxes. There was no shrink wrap at all. Just I really appreciate that they went above and beyond to pack it in an eco-friendly way, given the nature theme of the game. Or even if it wasn't nature themed, I appreciate that. But particularly because it was a nature themed game. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Undergrove. I'd love to hear your favorite mechanisms in the game if you get to play it, or if this shared tableau mechanism, which really feels like Earth, but with a shared tableau. If you can think of any other games that do that, let me know about that in the comments below. Thanks.